Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, this is the season when the city is awash with purple, green, and gold, but through Monday, it's the purple and gold that will stand out as LSU pursues a national title. The Dome is the same site where the Saints' title pursuit fell short. We will look tonight at what went wrong Sunday and what should go right this Monday. In Jefferson Parish, a new team has taken the field with the inauguration of parish officials, and in Orleans, the city is facing a proposal to demolish 3 historic buildings as part of the Hard Rock site demolition. And an investigation continues of alleged irregularities by an independent school bus company. These stories, plus what to expect from the new carnival season, are on the march for tonight's Informed Sources. ERROL LABORDE, producer of Informed Sources. David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. Jeff Duncan, reporter, The Athletic website. And Jeff Adelson, reporter, The Times-Picayune, The New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to go over to Jeff Duncan, Jeff D. first. What can we say? What happened on Sunday? That was not supposed to be the outcome.
Don't blame me. I had nothing to do with it. It was kind of the perfect storm, if you will, of a convergence of events that added up to, a loss, a surprising loss. I said it was probably the most surprising playoff loss they've had in the Breeze-Payton era. I mean, Saints were 8-point favorites. They were playing the Superdome. They were playing a team that had kind of limped into the playoffs. The Vikings had lost their last 2. The Saints were one of the hottest teams in the league. So I think everybody was kind of stunned. And I really think sometimes all it takes is just a little bit of an edge that you lose when you play at home in a game like that. You're a little overconfident. The Saints were that way all season long to some degree. They didn't play as well at home as they did on the road. I think they had more of an edge on the road this year. And I think the Vikings were a very difficult matchup. Mike Zimmer used to coach with Sean Payton on the same staff. They played each other a number of times the last few years. They know the Saints very well. And they had a very good game plan. And then lastly, I think the Saints just picked a bad game to play poorly. They had a number of their best players did not play well. Drew Brees did not play well. Marshawn Lattimore, Ryan Ramczyk. I mean, these are Pro Bowl players, all pro-level players that played some of their worst games of the whole season, all in the same game. So all those things, I think, added up to what we saw on Sunday.
The surprising thing for me was the way they got beat at the line of scrimmage on both sides, because just a few weeks earlier, the last meaningful game that Minnesota played, it was against Green Bay. They just got pushed around by Green Bay on the line. And Green Bay, we thought, was kind of the weakest of those top teams, kind of backed into it, almost lost to the Lions in the last game of the season. And then the Saints just got pushed around with these all-pro players on the line.
And I think that's a great point. I think it's a lesson for all of us that if you watch one game, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what that team is. If a lot of people watch the Saints at home against the Falcons in Week 10, they would have thought the Saints were terrible. I think all of us in New Orleans watched that Packers-Vikings game in Week 16 and thought, well, this is going to be a pushover. And clearly the Vikings just laid an egg in that game. That was not the real Vikings team. I think what we saw this past weekend was the real Vikings team.
The expectations for this team were really high, and this team was considered to be one of the best of the Saints, if not the best.
I think it was the most complete team the Saints have ever had. They really didn't have very many weaknesses. Their defense was better than probably it's ever been in the Peyton Breeze era. Their special teams were probably the best in the entire league. And the offense was starting to hum under Breeze. The offense was, really efficient down the stretch. Breeze was the NFC Player of the Month or NFL Player of the Month in the last month of the season. So everything seemed right. And, Breeze used that line all season long. We want to be an ascending team at the end of the year, and they were. And it looked like this team had the goods to make it all the way. The coaching staff's excellent. So it was a great disappointment. Everyone out on Airline Drive in that facility was devastated at how they lost. But the one thing I would say is at least it wasn't taken from them. At least it wasn't a bad call, a bad bounce of of the ball, a flukish play like it happened 3 years ago in Minnesota. This was just kind of a beating, and
Maybe
it's a little easier to accept.
Maybe this can put to rest that whole thing about momentum going into the playoffs, because if you think about it, the year we won the Super Bowl 2009, they lost the last 3 games, shockingly, to bad teams. And this time they go in on a high. They blew out Carolina in the last game. They won all those last games, and then they just laid an egg.
Yeah.
The other thing that came to mind is the whole voodoo behind who gets the top seeds into the finals. Like that week before, the game between Seattle and San Francisco, and had Seattle, again, we have nothing to do with, had Seattle scored a touchdown, then the Saints would have winding up getting home field and not have to play that game. And so tonight we'd be talking about the first round of playoffs for us.
But what's the difference if we can't even beat Minnesota?
That's my point. That was my point all along. I mean, they lost at home to a bad team.
The difference is that we'd have had an extra week.
Yeah.
And, I mean, we could have just as well, beaten.
And I think you make a good point, Errol, and I think the biggest advantage you get, I'm working on a book right now about Peyton and Bree's, shameless plug here, but in the research that I've done on this book project, what I've really come to appreciate is, as much as the physical grind of a 16-game season, it's really, I think, more a mental grind. And that's the advantage, I think, you get by not having the game. Everybody thinks, oh, the players are beaten up, and there's some element of truth to that, but I think more than anything, if you knew how much work the players and coaches put into a game plan, how much time they spend grinding away on film, I mean, working 14, 16-hour days, I think mentally that just takes its toll. And it might have taken its toll on this team. I know the last week of the season, the Vikings rested a lot of their starters, a lot of their key players. They almost took the game off. And they came in very fresh and energized and certainly played that underdog role in this game, it being 8-point underdogs. And the Saints, it felt like all the pressure was on them. And I felt like midway through that game, Sean Payton and Dennis Allen decided, you know what, we kind of have our pants down here in the game plan. Our game plan's not very good. Let's just try and sneak out of here and escape with a win. And I think they played kind of conservatively, unlike what we're used to seeing from that coaching staff and from Drew Brees. And they almost pulled it off. They almost did.
Quick to wrap this up, and then I know we'll be talking about this more, future of Drew Brees.
Well, I'll be shocked if he doesn't come back and play at least one more year. I mean, from everything I've been able to gather, the Saints want him back. I think he wants to continue playing. I don't think he wants to go out without making at least a deep run. I think this would not be the right way to go out. What would keep him from I think what would cause him to retire would be simply if he feels personal reasons. He's been away from his family too long. It's not because he can't play. I mean, he had a fantastic season, and I know the Saints have said over and over, as long as he wants to play, we'll have him back.
And plus, he's at the point where he's making so many records now, and so in another season, there's that many more records that he secures.
Well, yeah.
And he's racing Tom
Aren't
Brady.
any more to get.
But he doesn't really.
just needs
I'll
to
be
hold
honest with you. I
on.
mean, obviously he does care about those, but I think more important for him and his legacy is getting another Super Bowl ring, and at least getting there, getting on that big stage, and I think that's going to weigh heavily on him not going out with a wild card loss.
We certainly would love to see him get it with the Saints again, too. Okay, thanks a lot, Jeff. Over to Jeff Adelson now. Hard Rock Hotel demolition delayed again. City really not happy about that at all. And then also there's a request for them to demolish a few buildings by the hotel that are actually owned by people involved with the hotel.
And that's right. What's happening now is the latest plans from the developers have called for a demolition that could stretch all the way to December. A lot of that's going to be due to some time that it's taking to shore up the building, because they first got to stabilize the whole thing so that they can send crews in to start picking it apart piece by piece, and that's going to take a lot longer than they initially thought. Now, the city, New Orleans Fire Superintendent Tim McConnell has sort of been in charge of the city's handling of this whole thing, and he's certainly getting kind of frustrated with the whole process. Seems both the timing and the fact that a lot of this effort to stabilize the building, to shore it up, is actually a fairly dangerous process, right? You've got to send people into this building that you don't know what the structural integrity is, and have them sort of build the scaffolding that's going to keep it up. So the city's sort of, I think, getting to a point where they're getting a bit frustrated with the whole process, but it's not clear that they really have any cards to play on.
Well, the city talked a big game about how their emergency declaration would give them authority to really call the shots, that the developer would have to pay for everything, but they were going to determine the timelines, they were going to determine what happened. And we saw that when the state actually had their emergency declaration for the taking down the implosion of those cranes, they forced that issue and made it happen quickly. But it looks like the city's declaration powers don't really give them that power, or they would have more effectiveness with this.
And I think that's absolutely right. I mean, when you talk to McConnell and other people at the city, right now it seems like the developers are the ones that are developing the plan. They're the ones that are sort of setting the timeline. The city has the ability to say yes or no, but the city is not driving the plans at the moment.
And also, the developers own those 3 buildings, or some of the developers, at any rate, own the buildings that they're now seeking to demolish, perhaps.
Right. This is a whole separate aspect of this, which is the developers are saying that 3 buildings right around the Hard Rock site itself, which sort of complete that half block there on Rampart and Canal, need to come down because they need to get cranes in that wouldn't be able to reach the full extent of the site if those buildings stay up. Now, they were originally supposed to go before a city historic board this week to ask them for permission to knock down those buildings, which are around 100 years old. They're have some historic relevance. But they backed off at the last minute. The developers said, our plans keep changing. We've got some new plans that we've got to sort of finalize. And
but they're the ones who push for it. Why would they push for it and then come in and say, oh, we need more time?
Well, I mean, there's the big question, right? This was the plan that developers put forward. Now they're saying, our plans are changing. We may need to rethink this. It doesn't seem like there's sort of a solid proposal out there.
And of course, the councilwoman who represents that district is totally against these buildings coming down.
Yeah.
Also, the fire chief seemed to be really, really, like you said, frustrated with this delay now in the full demolition. And the response from the developer was, well, we have lawsuits that are holding us up. But now we hear them say, well, wait, we're not really quite sure, so hold up on the request for, we don't even really quite know how the demolition of the main building is going to go. So what is the issue here?
There is this discussion about court orders dealing with preserving evidence on the site, and that's both sort of lawsuits and the potential criminal prosecutions or OSHA prosecutions involved in this tragedy. Because remember, 3 people died in this collapse.
And you should know 2 bodies still remain there in
correct.
The hotel.
Yeah, doesn't that add to the delicacy of the discussion, the fact that there still are 2 bodies there?
I think it does. And I think one thing that Mayor Cantrell has made very clear is that getting those bodies out is a top priority of hers. Now, the current process that they're talking about, this lengthy, piece by piece process, is sort of the best chances of getting the remains out of the building. But those.
Because remember, there was a plan earlier to implode the building, and then they came back and said, no, this is not going to be safe, so we're not going to do that. So, it's just confusing to the community about what's really going to happen.
Well, I'm sorry. The question I've always had on this is it unprecedented? I mean, is something like this similar happened across the country? I would assume there's been a skyscraper that's been built that's had some kind of similar situation.
There aren't a lot of examples.
Not this tightly packed, right? Isn't that
right.
the issue? Because they talked about the federal building, Oklahoma City bombing
Right.
and all that, and there were bodies in there, and they're trying to get, but that was in like an open area.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, we'll continue to discuss this, I know, as we're really not sure what the timeline is or what they're going to do. All right,
I
thanks a
expect
lot,
there'll be a
Jeff.
lot.
Yeah. All right, David, over to you. You've been working on a story about school buses, particularly, primarily in Orleans Parish, with the charter schools, and they have to contract with private operators, and there are still questions about what's going on with some of these bus companies.
Right. Well, this is a big, larger story that kind of manifested with a specific company in the last week or so. I've been doing this series called Taken for a Ride, and we've looked at how this wild, wild west of school buses, as one official called it, has really caused problems with safety on the school buses, complying with all kinds of ordinances, and then having proper insurance. And I discovered last March that there was a company that was driving for 9 charter schools in the city, and these are public schools now. All of the public schools in the city of New Orleans are charter schools, so they're private companies running public schools essentially, and they have to contract with private bus companies. And we found that this one bus company called Scholars First was falsifying its insurance. We caught it in the act kind of providing false documentation, and the insurance commissioner cracked down, and there was an investigation, and they were fired from all of these jobs, or so we thought, because as we looked into this year's schools, we discovered that a company called EMS Transportation was hired by 2 different schools, including one that had Scholars First as its company before. And EMS Transportation was run by the insurance agent who had sold its insurance to Scholars First, and then through emails I was able to discover that the principals of Scholars First were handling operations for that company behind the scenes. So the schools claimed that they didn't know that this company was really kind of a reconstituted version of the company that we had caught falsifying their insurance.
So that begs the question then, is there a problem now with this whole school bus operation for the charter schools? Is the school board getting its arms around it?
Well, starting just this week, it appears that they're asserting themselves more, because over the last several months, my Taken for a Ride series has shown how frustrated the city had become, because the city had stepped into the void to implement new regulations using the for-hire vehicle regulations that apply to taxis and limousines, and applying them to school buses. But basically the school bus companies were saying, go ahead and make us do it. If we don't, what are you going to do? Take us off the road? Then these kids won't be able to get to school. So very low numbers of these buses were complying with the new regulations. And now with this incident, with the high-rise crash last month, you may recall 15 kids went to the hospital when a bus overturned, and it turned out the driver was a convicted felon who had been denied a permit by the city, and he was still driving, and the bus had not been inspected. With those incidents now, the school board, which is now called NOLA Public Schools, says it's going to force these schools to take a more active role to make sure their buses are in compliance, and if they aren't, they have to have a plan in place by February 13th.
And the school buses are really just very important, as you point out, to get the kids to school, because so many kids are going to school literally across town from their neighborhoods. It's not like before where you had neighborhood schools and kids could walk.
Exactly. They're really reliant on it, and it is, like I said, this very diverse system that's hard to keep a handle on, and it's not a centralized school board like it used to be. And so now, finally, the school board is starting to assert itself.
Okay. I'm sure that you're going to keep on top of this.
Absolutely.
All right, David. Thanks a lot. ERROL, new government inaugurated in Jefferson Parish.
A new parish president,
Administration.
A partially new council, overall a new crowd, and a new mood at the inauguration. They all talked about unity, no fighting, no animosity. We're going to all work for the parish good. Let me just mention that in a democracy, fighting isn't necessarily a bad thing, okay? And unity isn't necessarily always a good thing. I mean, it depends on, bringing about different ideas and things like that. But nonetheless, right now they're talking about the unity part of it. It's there are several plans up ahead, and some of the obstacles, some of the major issues they're going to be facing. One of the first is dealing with the East Jefferson Hospital. That still hasn't been resolved, and so there's one thing about selling it or leasing it, and that has to be done. There's land use issues in Jefferson Parish. The east bank of Jefferson Parish is totally full. There's nowhere, if somebody wants to move into a new subdivision or something, there's no new subdivision. Plus, there's a lot of aging structures out there. And some of the old suburban style homes aren't necessarily the kind that sell best on the market. So there needs to be like a redefining of that. There's plumbing problems and drainage problems, but still, overall, there's the vitality of a suburban neighborhood. One area that I think is going to see a lot of promise in the next year or so is the work that's being done in the Bucktown area. If you look at the lakefront along the waterfront along Bucktown, there's some really good plans going on there, and with piers and walkways and that sort of thing. And so it's going to be a vital area. And I think Cynthia Lee Schwang is certainly somebody who just personified Jefferson Parish. You know, the first person she acknowledged was her dad, Harry Lee, and she just grew up in Jefferson Parish government and is very vivacious and up to the task.
Well, it will be interesting to see what direction this new administration will move Jefferson Parish in.
Yeah, and there's no real cleavage. I mean, there have been times if you look at Jefferson Parish politics and like there's this faction and there's this faction versus each other. It's not like that, and they're all Republicans and stuff, except maybe one person. All right, and
don't forget that you got some controversial issues on the West Bank with the landfill and the cyanide plant and things like that.
That's where the bigger issues are, but it's not like,
But there's been some growth also on the West Bank, you know, with the new UEP Long Bridge. So it will be interesting to see what direction the parish will move into. Okay, thanks a lot, Ade. All right, here it is, the Friday before the Monday of the LSU game. Now, we do want to see a win there, don't we?
Well, the hopes and championship dreams of Louisiana sports fans all rest on the LSU Tigers after the Saints have bowed out. And look, this has been a magical season, arguably the greatest season in LSU football history. They could complete it with this championship. I think this season has exceeded the wildest dreams of all LSU fans. The offense long has been a source of frustration for LSU football fans, and they've taken it so far the other way, arguably the greatest offensive season in college football history, and it's happened against some of the best teams in college football, so it's not like they're in a lesser conference putting up these numbers. And I think Joe Burrow's run to the Heisman Trophy, I mean, this could be spectacular if they were able to pull it off.
You're talking about in terms of this being the greatest college team ever.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I think it might be the greatest offense ever. There's been some great teams. You're right, and it has been brought up. And if they finish it because they play in the SEC West Division, which is arguably, I think, and widely recognized as the most competitive division in all of college football, you can make that argument. But there's some old Nebraska teams. There are old University of Miami teams. I can distinctly remember the teams that their third stringers ended up being NFL players. There was one Miami team Jeremy Shockey played on, the former Saint, where 8 players are going to end up being in the Hall of Fame off this one college team. So I think those would be strong arguments. But what they've done offensively has broken almost every record.
And speaking of former Saints, Joe Brady, the passing game coordinator, right, came from the Saints. And that's a lot of people attribute the success to him, not as much as Joe Burrow, but significant.
Who gets the credit for getting Burrow from Ohio State? Was Orgeron or who?
Well, there's a couple of people that were involved. Some of the coaches on the staff had connections to him, but mainly Ed Orgeron had to do a recruiting job. I mean, Joe Burrow was bound to go to Cincinnati. Luke Fickell, the coach at the University of Cincinnati, was at Ohio State when Joe Burrow was there and had moved on to Cincinnati. Joe Burrow is from eastern Ohio, not far away, and that's really the sell job he had to make, come down to Louisiana. Joe Burrow had never been to Louisiana, so he had to convince him to come down here and not stay home. And I think that was a difficult thing to do when he had all of his family and friends up there. And thank goodness they did do it, because he's changed everything. The perception now of the program has changed for quarterbacks all over the country. In the past, no one that played quarterback at a high level wanted to play at LSU. they were just living in this primitive Stone Age offensively. Now, every quarterback in the country is going to want to play in this system as long as they can keep Joe Brady, like David said.
Their opponent Monday, Clemson, what are they going to face?
Well, they're facing a team that hasn't lost in over 2 seasons, and a quarterback that's going to
defending national champions.
Defending national champions, and a quarterback that can trade throws with Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow is going to probably be the #1 pick in the NFL draft this coming year, and the next season, Trevor Lawrence is going to be the #1 pick. So we're looking at 2 quarterbacks that are going to be the #1 picks in the draft. They're going to play in the NFL for probably many years going against each other.
Does LSU walk away with the championship?
I think in the end they will, but I don't think this will be a blowout like we saw against Oklahoma. Clemson's just too pedigreed. They're a championship level team. They will be in this thing till the 4th quarter.
Okay, go Tigers.
What do
Definitely.
you think Nick Saban's pulling for?
I think he's probably pulling for Dabo. Dabo Swinney.
Okay, E, we're going to go over to you for a quick wrap-up of it's Carnival time.
Just to show the curative powers of Carnival, just like last Sunday when the whole town is depressed because of the Saints game, all of a sudden Monday morning it's 12th night. And so we went just
that
like
helped a
from,
lot.
okay, that's over, okay, so it's Carnival time. And so we're in the throes of it. Some things to look for this year is one is that Rex, after years, changed his float build. It went from Blaine Kern to Royal Artists, and they're going to be using a new float building technique, which is interesting. Jefferson Parish has been kind of like rebuilding its Mardi Gras in the last few years. And beginning last year, they experimented with changing the parade route, where the parade routes on the East Bank started Metairie Road and worked their way toward Clearview. They used to go the other way, so that the parades were getting late into the residential areas down the road, and so that's going to be a change. There's a new crew called the Mad Hatters in Jefferson Parish, which just saying this is going to be a big deal. It's going to be a lot of fun. So there's a lot of little bits and pieces of things happening. So indications are that the Carnival's the 25th, and that's the time of the year when it shouldn't be too cold and should be okay.
Jefferson Parish, there are some crews that decided not to march at all, but now you say we have the new ones. Something that has been a new addition over the past 10 years, 15 years or so are the marching groups, the different marching groups.
To me, that's one of the great innovations of Carnival, and I think Muses gets a lot of credit for that. These are the groups that march within the parades. They're fun groups, and what I like about them is that they're at the parade goers level. You're close to them. You can see the activities. They're funny groups, and they have good performances. I'd like to see more of them.
Male and female, like the Lacey Boys. I love those. I mean, what a great idea
Lacey Boys is one of the great.
to participate in the parade. In a rolling lounge chair.
In terms of the crews like Iris and Muses and Nix, especially ours, have gotten to be really, really big crews. I don't know. There are probably more women participating in Carnival, at least as riders, than they've ever been before now. They may be dominant now.
Okay, so Carnival time is here. Okay, Eve, sticking with you, looking ahead.
LSU Board of Supervisors voted today to not have school this Monday and Tuesday on the main campus because of the big game. However, if you go to LSU Eunice or LSU Alexandria, you got to show up.
You got to still go to class. Okay, Dave.
Well, sticking with the sports theme, I want to give a little plug. My brother is the CEO of the Historic New Orleans Collection, and they have a special exhibit through March called Crescent City Sports. It's an awesome exhibit, and tonight only, and it's free and open to the public, and tonight only they've got the CFP Championship trophy on display, and through March they have the Lombardi Trophy, so you can go see that.
Always great to go to HNOC anyway.
Yes.
Well, next Wednesday in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill, our own Steve Gleason is going to receive the Congressional Gold Medal.
Wow.
What a great honor, the highest civilian honor that Congress gives out. Mother Teresa, Thomas Edison also received this honor. Steve will be the first football player ever.
Congratulations to him and his family. Jeff?
On a lesser note, the city is still grappling with the effects of a cyber attack last month, and we're hoping to get a little more information in the next couple weeks, sort of how they're getting back to normal.
Municipal and traffic court still closed?
Municipal and traffic court still closed. City Hall is still using pen and paper. It's there's been some improvements, but far from normal. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again for Informed Sources next week. Have a good evening.